Raphael Sbarge, welcome back to Kicking the Seat. It's been a little while, and this is the first time I think that we've talked one-on-one without either, my co-pilot Sajiwa or Greg Lemley, your co-pilot in Inside the Arthouse, and also the documentary directed about him, only in theaters. So yeah, this is gonna be a fun one. How you doing,
Yeah,
sir?
yeah, nice to be here. And Ian, again, it's just amazing what you are able to keep up with. I mean, you all the things that you juggle, and your passion for movies is just it's so always great to talk to you.
Well, thank you. And the reason we're talking today is, well, first of all, Criterion put out as a few months ago now a 4K of Risky Business, which is like 36, I think, years old now. And instead of doing like a regular review, because I've discussed the movie before about for the 30th anniversary, I think I did an episode of late screening where I talked to my friend Cole, who's a millennial who didn't watch a lot of movies growing up. So kind of introducing him to films for the first time and seeing what he thought.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, we both really dug it. He was a fan, and I've been a lifelong fan of that film. But I wanted to. Well, I was inspired by a dinner that we had last year when you were in Chicago when we screened or when you screened only in theaters at Facets, and Sergio was there with his film, and it was a really fun conversation we had, a bit about Risky Business, but I thought, what I learned about you and your career, the little tidbits I got, I thought this would be a much better long form kind of conversation, because you told some anecdotes about making the movie. You talked about sort of your career before and after making the movie. So I thought it'd be fun to kind of dig into that and let everyone else hear these great stories and maybe even some more, if that's cool with you.
Yeah, I'm game. Here we go. Let's do it.
Right. Well, first of all, I made the mistake when we opened up during that dinner saying, oh, Risky Business, that was your first movie. So what was it like getting into showbiz? And you said, well, I've been in showbiz for quite a while before that. You were one of the original Sesame Street kids.
Yeah, I was living on the Lower East Side, and they were shooting at that time down there in an old warehouse, kind of in the Tribeca area, and I sort of, I don't know how I found myself there. And I remember distinctly meeting Big Bird and Oscar the Grouch and Mr. Hooper, who was there for a long time, sang songs. He put me on a donkey, and we talked the difference between donkeys and horses, and Bob sang a song to us. Anyway, I did a bunch of them, and apparently, so I heard years later that they had said they wanted me to be on it more regularly, and my mother had said no. And she was a costume designer. She was very busy and was a New York costume designer. And she's like, look, I don't want to sit around and be a stage mother, and this business is too hard. And if you want to do it, you're going to have to do it yourself. Which I appreciated. It wasn't, it is too hard. And I don't recommend it. And I'm delighted that my children don't want to do this. And that's not to say anything about them. And that's to say that I've had a wonderful career, but it's challenging. Being able to step into it, one has to sort of have one's sense of personal passion to keep it going.
So, I mean, you were 4 at the time, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
what I mean, that's some great perspective that you have on it now. But at the time when you found out, okay, you were having fun with Jim Henson's, creations and all that stuff, but you weren't going to be part of the regular, ongoing thing. Was that disappointing to you? Did you understand kind of, what your mom was doing and looking out for you in that way?
Yeah, I did understand it. I mean, I was 13, 12 and a half, 12, I don't know, somewhere. I did my first play at 7. And then I did a bunch of other sort of smaller things, and then decided at 12 that I wanted to be an actor. And we were moving from Connecticut. My mother had been a professor at Yale there at the drama school when Meryl Streep and Sigourney Weaver and Wendy Washington and Chris Durang were all students. And so I'd hung out a lot and watched these shows. Remember vividly Meryl Streep, one of her, graduate performances, and, just was around a lot of wonderful actors. And the actors were always so kind to me because I hung out backstage, and I just, it was kind of like a group babysitter kind of thing. And it was like all the cool kids were there. And I was like, these are fun. So I called an actress friend who had been on one of my mother's shows. And I said, what do I do? And she said, well, here's my agent's phone number. Give him a call. And I said, okay. So I was 13 and I got my bike. Well, first of all, I called and made an appointment. And then I biked over to the East Side and I went up and I was a very precocious kid. And they said, have you ever had any representation before? And I said, representation, what's that? I don't know what that is. And they said, and I had some credits at this point. I'd had a couple of things and they said, wow. So I worked at the Yale Rep at this point and they said, well, do you sing? And I said, oh yeah. And I was in a boys choir and I was a boys treble and we traveled to Canterbury Cathedral and I broke into the Handel's Messiah, the boy treble part of Handel's Messiah. And they apparently were very sort of charmed by this this little precocious kid with no mother around. And they said, look, we don't represent kids, but we're going to send you out. And they did. And the first thing they sent me out was a Jell-O commercial, and I got my SAG card, and then I just started studying in New York. I would use my bus pass. New York. If you're a New York City kid, you get a bus pass to travel to school, or it's a subway or bus pass. And so I would use that, and I would go to acting classes and voice classes and various things. And the city became kind of like an extended kind of a college in a way. And then I did my first play at the Public. Got my equity card at 16. I got my AFTRA card, and I just started working. I did my first Broadway play at 16 with Faye Dunaway. And then there I was essentially at 18, and I auditioned for this movie called Risky Business. And I had, I'd done other films at that point, and I'd done a bunch of television, but it was just one of those like, well, let's go do this. And there were a lot of teen kind of sex comedies at the time. It was sort of the thing, and off I went. I graduated high school and went right to Chicago, basically.
Lots to break into there. So, all right. First of all, you're going around New York at between 13 and 16, just like looking for jobs, getting jobs, performing places by yourself. I mean, I assume, or did you have any kind of accompaniment, or it was just a different time?
It was a different time for sure, and I don't know. It was kind of like. I mean, I think about it now, and I'm so I wandered into some dark alleys. There's no question about it, I'm still here, and people wouldn't do it now the way my mother and father decided to kind of give me a lot of room and a lot of freedom, and the city felt a little different as well. But I had a lot of very sort of vivid experiences very young, and again, living in New York, growing up here, and finding my way around was a wonderful teacher for me. And ultimately, I didn't go to college, right? So because I thought, well, why go to college? I'm already working, and I'm and I'm training and I'm doing shows, and like, why take 4 years and go away when I'll just keep working? And that's what I kind of did.
So when you're living this life and you're meeting actors and you're performing with them, you've got that, I imagine, that sort of childhood wonder of like, oh, I'm living my dream. I'm performing, I'm becoming other people. There's sort of like accolades, whether you're in a Jell-O commercial or performing on stage, there's that kind of recognition. But, we hear a lot now about the sort of the darker side of entertainment. And you said you wandered into some dark alleys. Was there anything that kind of, or anyone that sort of discouraged you to say like, oh, this isn't, a fantasy, this is real world work, and there's kind of dangerous people out there, or, not everything's going to work out? Or were there other people who said, it is a bit of a grind, but, your dreams are on the other side of that?
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to remember now. I mean, when I say I wanted some dark alleys, I mean, there were some people that I met that were unsavory or, had other agendas. I navigated that. I seemed to be a very driven kid, and I had a real sort of I wanted to do this, and I was gonna do it, and so I just kept kind of going, and I'm not, again, I don't really, I mean, I look at 13-year-olds now and I go like, holy Moses, what I was doing at that point and what, again, I mean, there were no child labor laws in New York at the time, or at least I don't know if there's still not, but I mean, I could go and work on a set, do a commercial, for example, and then bring the contracts home to be signed by my mother because I was a minor, and I did it myself. I showed up, I took care of it. I got my dad was a photographer, took my headshots. I figured out where to get them duplicated, and I just kind of did it, and I kept studying, and I don't really entirely understand it, honestly, but there was clearly kind of a drive in me, and that's sort of always been the case. And now here I am, many years later, and I'm still doing it, and I've been able to kind of make a living as an actor. I've obviously done some directing things and producing things, but I'm, being an actor is what I do and what I've done now my whole entire life.
Well, so getting the audition for Risky Business, did you, was it just sort of an open thing like, hey, come read for any part, or did someone call you and say, oh, you'd be perfect for Glenn or for for Joel even,
Yeah, that's interesting actually, because when we recently had a 40th anniversary, because it premiered in '83, so we had our 40th anniversary kind of a screening.
That's right. I'm sorry. I totally botched the math on that.
That's all right.
So
math
yeah.
is not my forte either. But when we did, I saw Paul Brickman, and Paul had some photos of Bronson and Curtis and I, which was sort of a callback that he had done for us, where we had sort of switched roles, where we were all, it was sort of a round robin to see who fit where. And ultimately, and Kevin Anderson, by the way, was another actor there. He wasn't at that reading because he was in Chicago, but he was also in, he's in the movie very briefly. Wonderful actor. And he kind of shows up kind of like as one of the other guys. I think he might have been considered for one of the other roles, and he decided to sort of be in the movie. Yeah, in those days you would walk into a room and you would audition. These days you do it all on tape. But it was you go and then you go back again and then you go back again, and then there was this kind of mix and match thing, and Curtis and Bronson and I all did that.
Were you able to get access to the full script, or do you just have kind of sides? Like, did you have a sense of what this movie was that you were auditioning for?
I'd read it. I mean, I don't know if I understood it in its sort of ultimately largest context. Certainly not in terms of what I mean. It was, but again, there were a lot of these movies at the time. It wasn't shocking or unusual, and there were more of them that came after, right? The Porkies and the various other things that kind of came along again that were sort of really their stock in trade was topless women and fart jokes and lots of sort of weird sex jokes and kind of goofy situations. It didn't seem shocking. For example, the movie itself is incredibly sexy, and in some ways sort of like gaspingly sexy. And part of that is also the chemistry between Tom and Rebecca that we feel, and it is or was shot in a really artful, and it was shot like an art film,
Yeah.
And apparently one of the first DPs, there was a DP that actually left because he was like, you're doing this all wrong, Brickman. You're shooting this, this isn't the kind of movie that you're making. You're making a teen sex comedy. And he was like, no, I want to make this other movie. And apparently he left. He quit or was fired. I don't know what happened, but essentially, they brought in a new guy and Villalobos, and basically they shot it in a moody, dark, kind of art house kind of cinema way. And that, of course, is what sort of sets it apart from all those kind of bright, teen sex comedies that were de rigueur, at the time.
I mean, even just the opening where you've got Tom Cruise going into a house and there's a naked lady in the shower and he goes towards her and then he's all of a sudden he's in a class and he's missing his final, his entire future is over. I mean, that is very far from sort of the, for lack of a better term, masturbatory material of those contemporary films. So
Yeah.
I guess, did you, I'm wondering how Risky Business read to you as a script versus how it came out in the wash as a film. Did it surprise you that it ended up the kind of art house movie that it did, or were you like, oh, okay, this is all on the page? Because I imagine reading it might come off one way. There's probably a way that you could direct Risky Business as one of its contemporary kind of sex comedies, and there's a way Brickman did it. I was wondering, did you go back and read the screenplay after you made and watched the movie and said, oh, this is completely different, or no, this was on point the whole time?
You know, I think what you said a moment ago, I mean, I don't recall my reaction to reading the script, but I think what you said is actually on point, which is just that it could have gone either way. You could have shot. I mean, Paul even talked about how they had an early poster. Warner Brothers had an early poster art, which was basically Tom with on the hood of a car with, you know, two women falling out of their shirts, basically, or bikinis, and it was a you know, him smoking a cigar, and it was a classic kind of, you know, teen, you know, basically teen sex comedy kind of message, right? And he was like, no, we got to do something else. And this was what ultimately he did, which was that, you know, now famous shot of him basically in the Ray-Bans, right? And by the way, I have a fun story. But I don't know if I told you this, but I remember the moment. So what happens is when you are on a movie, the props obviously all get sort of figured out by, you know, the prop master, and there's a lot of meetings and discussions about what's what. But there's certain things like your watches and other stuff that are kind of, you know, decided in the moment. So invariably they come out either with a tray or like a kind of one of those guys you see on the street that open a piece of cloth and it has a whole bunch of stuff in it, right? Like, hey, you want to pick a watch? But I remember the moment where they basically did that, and Tom with glasses, with sunglasses, and Tom reached for the Ray-Bans, and I you know, I think Ray-Ban stocks went up like 2,000% after that movie, something crazy. But there is a it was just one of those random moments, and and it's so funny because it's so tied, so it's so iconic to the kind of the culture and the kind of the, I don't know, the fabric of what that movie is.
So alternate history time, you were there to see this moment where he picked the Ray-Bans, right? Or some of the other selections. I mean, I can't imagine him wearing anything
They
else.
just have a little bit of everything, you know, just like, which one do you like, you know? And
wow.
You know, and that's an actor's choice. They get to kind of decide in that moment, you know. So it's funny.
Now, being 18 and having just graduated high school, you're kind of like right in the target demo for who this movie is going to appeal to. Did, you know, reading the screenplay, did that speak to you? Did it kind of grab you, or were you thinking, oh, this is kind of weird, or I don't know what this movie is?
Yeah, no, I mean, the movie really speaks to that moment where you are trying to figure out like what's next, what's your future, what's going to happen, you know, where are you going to go? Where's my life going from here? You know, that kind of thing. And I am, they captured something. So I had a conversation with Paul Brickman and John Avnet at the 30th anniversary, and they talked about this again when we did our sort of talk back in LA. But they very much set out to make what was kind of a graduate for the 80s.
Yeah.
And that was very on purpose. And what's interesting about Risky Business is, if you watch it, and it's really funny movie. I mean, there's just so many laugh out loud moments, and there's such wonderful kind of humor from character, you know what I mean, as opposed to kind of just sort of slip on a banana peel jokes. And there was there is a real subversive element to this movie. I mean, it really, if you look at it and you watch it, there's something kind of like where he's really kind of, I mean, if you remember when the movie came out, it was pre-Reagan, or Reagan was just about to come in. Prior to that, you know, money and making money and being rich was not necessarily what everyone aspired to. It was not, I mean, hard to imagine now, but that was not, certainly not anyone that I knew would have ever said that. It was sort of shocking, kind of like, what? Yeah, I want to make money. And that's what they captured in this movie, which is, you know, essentially the graduate equivalent of, I got a word for you, kid, plastics. And so they captured this kind of, I want to say, transition moment going from pre-Reagan to Reagan, where Reagan really sort of changed the tune and everything really became much more about get what you can, get as much money as you can, you know, and this kind of, again, huge shift of sort of a consciousness shift that occurred after that. And if you look at the movie, like, I mean, you've got essentially different kinds of capitalism, right? You've got the little capitalism club, which is with, you know, Tom and Bronson basically, you know, doing their kind of like their memo thing for their young achievers or whatever it is. And then you've got essentially the, you know, Guido, and he's running his business, you know, remember, Joel, don't fuck with the man's livelihood, you know, and that's his, you know, his form of capitalism, right? And then you've got, you know, kind of all these different, you know, illicit and then legal, but semi-legal kind of, you know, kinds of aspirations for money and making it big and making it rich. And so he captured something in that script that I believe. I mean, if they aspired to go for a Graduate, I think they did. I think they rang the bell. I mean, The Graduate's a great movie, and obviously with a great director. And I don't take anything from The Graduate, because The Graduate's one of the great movies. But in terms of it, sort of the way it is a time capsule for a very specific moment, I feel like they did that.
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting because in The Graduate, you've got, you know, Dustin Hoffman's character, Ben. That whole plastics thing was meant to be the thing that kind of repulsed him. He didn't want to get the corporate job, although he didn't quite know what else he would do. Whereas with Joel Goodson and all of his friends, there's that great scene where you're sitting around the table at the diner saying, what do you want to do with your life? Make money, make money, make money. And then Joel says, you know, I want to help my fellow man. And then they all burst out laughing, right?
Right.
It is sort of that Family Ties, Alex P. Keaton kind of vibe of like the young Republican kind of like, yeah, let's take everything that we can get attitude. And it's strange that is kind of a subversive idea at that time. It's got a very dark ending, because even though ostensibly the boy gets the girl, there's that closing narration that almost reminds me of another contemporary of that time, just, you know, a couple years removed, American Psycho. You've got Bret Easton Ellis's Patrick Bateman kind of narrating his life. He's all about money. He's all about appearances, all about the girls. But at the end of Risky Business, Joel is saying, you know, I made $8,000 in one life, or one night. Is my life amazing, or something like that? And then it closes. He's cuddling up with Rebecca De Mornay's character. They are ostensibly together, but you're not quite sure what that means or if it's a good thing.
Right. So I haven't gotten the DVD yet, or the Blu-ray. I'm looking forward to it. But there is another ending, which is even significantly more dark, and I think is what ultimately, you know, the question always is like, why didn't Paul Brickman direct anything else after? I mean, I think there's a lot of reasons, but I know that one thing that happened was that David Geffen came out and saw the movie and forced them to change the ending, and I think that they wanted something even darker, which is what they had actually. It's probably, you'll see it on the disc. I'm sure it's an alternate ending, but it really actually goes more. it really speaks. I forget. There's like one line, but it just kind of essentially leaned into this whole idea of, the emptiness of capitalism in a way, and what it does as it ended up was kind of this. It's a bit more of a happy ending, it's a pretty lady kind of a happy ending, kind of a, sort of thing. And look, it works. Here we are still talking about it 4 years later. Right. So, I made a lot of other movies in the meantime, and we're not talking about those. Right. This worked, but there is, or was, again, I need, and you'll probably find on the disc, a darker version, that ultimately was not released when the movie came out.
Well, I would think that we're talking about, this is the Graduate of the 80s. I'm wondering if there's going to be a risky business for the new millennium, because something that really struck me watching it again this time is, now we're kind of in the era of, instead of like a guy setting up his house to be a brothel, right? We're in the era of like OnlyFans and like online kind of like entrepreneurs of people. Like Joel says, I made $8,000 a night. There's people that do that now with a webcam in their bedroom, and all sorts of ethical questions and morality and all this other stuff. I wonder if that could be. I'm not saying I want them to remake Risky Business, but there might be some kind of a successor or another line in that evolution of, what does that mean? What is capitalism doing to us as a nation, to our individual psyches and all that?
100%, 100%. I mean, there is an opportunity, I think, to redefine this again, and figure out what the heck, where are we headed? And then we step into, the politics of the moment and everything that's going on, which is, vast and at this point, complex.
Yeah.
We're stepping into, as it were, new territory on so many fronts. I think it'd be interesting to see, how each generation then kind of really sort of deals with this. What is their life ambition? What's their North Star? What are they aligning themselves to as they sort of set out and go forward? And how do we what are those values? What are those core values that they're connecting to?
Now, going back to sort of the question that set all of this up, you as a young actor just graduating from high school, and you're faced with this script. Joel Goodson doesn't quite know what he wants to do. He's got a vague idea about making money. And the movie is sort of about like figuring out your way. But you, as we've established, were a very precocious kid, very driven. So it seems to me like you already kind of had an idea, like, oh, I want to be a working actor. So was there something else that kind of spoke to you, like a subtext of the script that really jumped out, that might not have jumped out for someone who wasn't in your position, who had more of a head on their shoulders?
Was there something else that jumped out? I don't know if there's something else that jumped out. I mean, I think at that point, in a young actor, and an 18-year-old, and I just turned 18, right? So, I mean, it was I turned 18 in February. So we're talking, May. It was just very exciting to get a big movie, and I, flew to Chicago and was there. And I am not, again, I was there without my parents. I was there, and had this sort of peak experience, sort of making it. But the material was, I think at that point, it was just, oh my God, I got a big movie, and that was what was really exciting, I think. And again, no idea that it would be such a giant film, and kind of, there's so many things that were sort of extraordinary about this film. One of which, by the way, I rediscovered again just recently when we did these celebrations around the opening, was all of us were complete unknowns. Tom Cruise had done a couple of movies, but none of them come out, so no one really knew how he was. Rebecca had done nothing, literally nothing. She'd done an extra in a movie. Curtis was 10 years older. He was, 10 years older than I was. So he was, 28, 29. And he was, he had a big, he'd been working in the theater for years. And Bronson had just gotten out of college. He went to Yale Drama School. Even Joey Pants was, a relatively unknown at that point. But the fact that you would essentially be able to take a movie and whatever it is they spent on it, and then put complete unknowns in every role, and that they would have permission to do that, and that not only did it launch all of our careers and we're also working, but you also launched arguably the biggest star of the last 50 years, plus, and I'm sure him dancing around in his underwear is the the penultimate scene, and likely at that point when they do some sort of retrospective of his career at the end of his life, they're going to show him dancing around in his underwear, and that it's just extraordinary that they were able to get away with that they trusted their instincts, and that the people they picked have to a person done really remarkably well.
As far as like the the chemistry on the set, when y'all are, you've got the part, you're showing up for work, did the fact that you were all sort of unknowns, except for Tom, who's sort of it's going to be his star vehicle, was that lack of experience, did that lead to a lack of egos and help you kind of bond together and hang out? Did you hang out? Did you cruise around Evanston or the North Shore or Chicago?
We did. I forgot. Curtis reminded me that we actually came early and kind of all hung out, and I think they dropped us off at the mall, and we all sort of wandered around the mall, which was kind of what teenagers did at the time. I think that was Paul's idea to kind of have us bond, and we would hang out. There was a funny, weird sidebar, which is this, that so Tom had been in Taps with Sean Penn, and Tom apparently was, kind of like the third guy from the left, and Harold Becker had said, no, you, and had basically fired the guy who was playing the part and basically moved him into this part that was kind of, ultimately his first role. And then he went off and did, I think, Rumblefish, and then he got this. But he apparently stayed very close friends with Sean Penn. And so Sean was in Chicago doing another movie called... is
that Bad Boys?
Bad Boys, right. Bad Boys. Thank you. And Sean, I remember famously, Sean, was playing a prison inmate, and like in classic Sean Penn, like all in, he'd gotten a tattoo, a real tattoo to be, a prison tattoo. And anyway, we got together, Sean and Tom and I, several times. And I remember thinking, like, this guy's really fucking intense. And he would sort of look at you and kind of stare through you, because he was sort of in character, like, and we, I remember us we stayed in this hotel in Skokie, and Skokie, Illinois. There's nothing there. And it's outside Chicago, it's suburbs outside Chicago. And
that's where I'm recording from right now.
Oh, there you are. All right. So I don't remember the name of the hotel, but it was like a 2-story hotel. And essentially we went into the restaurant. They have like a breakfast thing where you can go, and Sean was playing basically a pyromaniac, picked up a piece of paper and lit it, and then threw it down, and then put on another napkin and threw it down, and started a bonfire in the middle of this restaurant. The waitress came in and doused it with water, and anyway, we just there is a scene where the car is backing out of Joel Goodson's driveway.
Hmm.
That is the moment, that penultimate moment when he's in his dad's Porsche and he turns on the music and you get that boom, 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 kind of that Tangerine Dream thing. And the car, as they're backing out, stalls. Well, I happened to be on the set that night, and Sean actually was visiting, and Sean's in the car with Tom when that happened. So I'm not sure where Bronson was, but just in that particular shot, Sean just happened to kind of was hanging out and came, and he's in the back of the car with Tom, which is fun. The other story that there's kind of like a sort of a wacky story, I guess, is just basically that, years and years before we understood what Tom's kind of penchant was for Fast and Furious, as it were, we were given a car to drive around Chicago by production, and so Tom and I were out, and we were going down Michigan Avenue. And Michigan Avenue, as you know, it's kind of like it's sort of freeway-ish. It's sort of, I mean, it's not really freeway, but it's a big road, and it was dark, very dark, and it was sort of an open sort of a span of road, and he just basically went bam, and he laid, pedal to the metal, and went like literally as fast as he could down Michigan. And as we were coming to this intersection, it was literally right out of a movie, the light changed, and a huge truck started to pull into the intersection, and he went, and then basically turned and right on the corner, and then turned to me and gave me one of those, Tom Cruise smiles, like, "Oh, wow, that's wild what just almost happened." And he and I wouldn't be here today had he not sort of had the ability to kind of turn as artfully as he did in that moment.
How old was he at that point? Because
we're both about the same age. We're just like 18, 19, in there, somewhere in there.
Wow.
We both had fake IDs to be able to drink at the bar. I think it was a 20-year-old. I think you had to be 20 to drink at the time. I can't remember. Anyway, and because there was a bar in the hotel as well at night, you'd go. And so, yeah, I mean, look, I haven't seen Tom in many, 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 many years, and I send hellos through mutual friends, and he's I admire him so much in terms of what he's done and what he's achieved and what he's accomplished and what he's been able to kind of carve out, and say what you will about any aspect of, his private life. The fact is that the fucking guy has been a giant, super watchable movie star for, all of our lives. And he is, he was he was planning to be a priest and basically decided to change and to become an actor. And he has gone on instinct and pure charisma and just lights the screen up. And he's a remarkable movie star. When much bigger stars at times have essentially been kind of like space shuttles. They've gone up fast and furious, and then kind of peaked and gone out. He just has maintained, and he's exciting and watchable, and he's a brand. Tom Cruise is a brand that's known all over the world. I got into a cab in Turkey once, and I said, "Oh," he said, "Where are you from?" I said, "America." He said, "Oh, Tom Cruise." It's like a thing. It's an American brand, and so he's an astounding person in terms of what he's done, what he's accomplished.
Did you get a sense of that working with him in those early days? I mean, you guys are kind of contemporaries. This is your first kind of big movie together. Did you have any sense of like, oh, this guy is he's going to basically dominate the planet.
No,
Or
not,
was there like, oh, he's just a regular guy, and all of a sudden, hey, look, there's Tommy. Wow, what's he doing?
yeah, no, not a clue. Not a clue. I mean, we were all basically walking in and out of rooms, auditioning for these various movies. I did more of them after this. And I did my science project not long after this, and Vision Quest, and another movie called My Man Adam, and Class was a movie. It was a Class. It was between Keith Gordon and I, and Rob Lowe, and just lost his name. Anyway, basically, we were the director's choice, and they went with the. So I mean, all of us were kind of just auditioning, and if you didn't get one, there was another one, kind of thing, and Tom just did something that no one else did, and he just kept kind of finding his way, and kept sort of like has on pure charisma just sort of created this incredible career.
I want to ask something, two kind of actorly questions. One is about Sean Penn, so I'll get back to him in a second. The other is about Tom Cruise. In that sort of opening sequence after the shower bit, and he's told his story about the dream being, late for his final exam, cuts to y'all are playing poker in a basement or something, and the guys are giving him a hard time about, did he make a move on this other girl? And he says, what do you think? And they said, I think you went home and whacked off. The look of embarrassment on his face, I never really noticed it before watching it this time, was so real that it felt like there was some genuine hazing or something going on. Was there something that was said on this set that day, or that caused that reaction, or was that just him doing his thing?
That's just him doing his thing. Yeah. That was my first day of filming, which was a absolutely overwhelming experience to be, on a set with a giant camera at the time. The cameras, they're like this big, right? You can practically put them in your purse, so but at the time there was just an enormous camera with a huge lens pointed at you. It felt like it was sort of like acting by firing squad. And I remember just sort of like, wow. And we were also smoking those cigars, and we all got sick, and anyway, but no, that was just they captured that moment.
The other thing is about Sean Penn. Now, having grown up, in the theater, TV, stage, and now coming into screen, I'm sure you would encounter a lot of actors, a lot of different methods, including possibly method. It sounds like what Sean Penn was doing, as you mentioned, he got a tattoo because he was in Bad Boys and all that. But that intensity where he's lighting stuff on fire and kind of like glowering at you and things, was there a part of you that thought, this is a performance, or this is really him? Did you get a sense of like, man, just chill out, it's just a movie?
Yeah, years later, I did another movie with him, which never really went anywhere. It was called The Assassination of Richard Nixon, and it was a true story about a guy who essentially hijacked a plane, weirdly, and wanted to fly it into the White House or the Pentagon or something, which had eerie overtones. This is prior to 2011, 2000, to the. Sorry, not 2011, 2001, obviously September 11th. And watching him work was incredible. Watching him kind of just sort of inhabit this guy was sort of, in a way, almost otherworldly. He was just so great, so great. He always had a sort of a gravitas that, and he was always sort of considered by the younger act when we were all younger as kind of in a way, it seemed like he was going to be the De Niro of our generation, and he had all of that. Again, I'm not sure what's happened in his personal life, and there's all sorts of other things. The guy's turned in some breathtaking performances. I worked with him again on this movie Gaslit, which was a kind of a mini series, kind of a limited series about Watergate, and he's he just goes so deep, and I never worked with Daniel Day-Lewis. I mean, I understand that Daniel Day-Lewis also did things where he would just once he started, he would kind of inhabit Lincoln, for example, and that was it for the whole time. Like, he was just there. Now, the guy retired, so clearly this is was very this has was not easy for him, and I clearly we all have different ways to sort of approach this. It's not my way to do it. But I respect the man enormously for his results in terms of kind of what he's done, because he's done some performances that are just like Dead Man Walking, great performance.
Well, I mean, I guess just kind of like being in the moment and experiencing that whatever he's doing, was there like an intensity, or were you uncomfortable, or did you figure, okay, this is kind of weird, but I know I'm safe. He's not going to do anything as part of his process.
Yeah, more the latter, right? I mean, I didn't feel like I was going to be physically attacked. Although I heard stories about people who were in movies with him who were, he didn't like, and he would go, his character didn't like their character, and he would go and, terrorize them, bang on their trailer and shake it, and, and do things to kind of, that it extended. That never happened to me. But he is an intense cat. There's no way around it. But again, the work is or was just astounding. Again, I'm not sure what's happened in his personal life, or what if he's done great work, and could he have done more, or was there some place that he missed, or I don't know. But the guy is sort of head and shoulders over so many other actors who would just kind of phone in. I mean, there's just something so astoundingly other level that he has. He's got like another gear.
Well, you've got several other gears, because instead of just stopping at acting, I mean, you, as I mentioned, you directed a documentary, only in theaters, which was great. That's how we first kind of came to know each other. But also, you recently won an Emmy for 10 Days in Watts. So how did you make that transition from acting to directing, movies, television? Did you kind of hit a place in performing where you thought, I need to do something more to keep myself interested, or did an opportunity just present itself? How did you even approach climbing into that from where you had started to where you ended up?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I was producing something with Ed Bigley Jr., and the director kind of suddenly became unavailable, and I had to step in. That's kind of where things kind of started. I wasn't the guy who always wanted to direct. I mean, in a way, if I had started younger, perhaps that would have also been a good thing. But I saw it as an extension of my storytelling. I'm a storyteller, as an actor, and you have to learn an awful lot in terms of kind of just the language of film in order to be able to kind of make it work. But working with other actors was something that I enjoy. I came from, my dad was a playwright and a documentary filmmaker. My mother was again, an artist. They were both artists, at the Theatrical Costume Center, and so I had grown up around a lot of visual people. So my ability to kind of find visual language was sort of available to me. But I started, and then did more, and then did more, and then found myself essentially doing this this movie with Greg Lumley, which was really ultimately became about. I mean, it was about a family and about a family business, but it was also ultimately kind of coincided with the kind of the larger existential questions of what's happening with theaters and going to movies, and we captured a moment, and then I, in the midst of when that actually started being released in theaters, I got literally we opened at the Santa Barbara Film Festival, and then I got this other opportunity to direct this movie that I'd hoped that I could do, but it ended up being a series, which was essentially this story about this other family who has run a kind of a community center in Watts, arguably one of the more underserved neighborhoods in California, and a really tough part of town, and a lot of extraordinary people in it, and who no one really seemed to kind of be interested in hearing from or about. And I went in and essentially befriended this man who's the center of it, and he saw that I was there for the right reason, and extended trust to me, and then said to people, you got to talk, excuse me, you got to talk to this guy. And I got a lot of wonderful people to talk to me, and as a result, we were able to make this wonderful series. So it really is the story. 10 Days in Watts is really a story of the 10 days leading up to the opening of a garden, a farm, a green space right at the foot of one of the more notorious housing projects in Watts, and it won an Emmy. And it was also won an LA Drama Critics Award, which is a journalism award, which is wonderful. It's nominated 6 times and nominated for 5 Emmys. And so it was wonderful to be that the film got recognized. You don't do it for that reason, but it was wonderful that it got recognized. And then it's also been a wonderful way to also kind of bring attention to this neighborhood, who really deserves basic services and has been forsaken in so many ways. So anyway, I have once that happened, once I finished only in theaters, and it sort of did its sort of full run in theaters, and then it went out on its ancillary, and then did 10 Days in Watts, and I kind of took a break and hadn't taken on any new directing projects. I just was, I had, it's extremely stressful and intense to do these things when they come along. And I still have this acting career that I love. And so, at some point it seemed like I was going to have to do either one or the other, because you either are all in. That's not to say I won't direct a film again. I'm sure I will, but at the moment, I opted for kind of getting back on the kind of the acting horse in a way, in a more rigorous way, and that's what I've been doing. Shy of the podcast.
Well, and I do want to talk about the podcast in a second, but something interesting you said there. After only in theaters, you were presented with the opportunity to work on 10 Days in Watts. I was always under the impression, naively possibly, that documentaries were the filmmaker has an idea, they want to explore something, they go out and make it, whereas someone else came up with the idea and then reached out to you. Is that it?
I'm sorry, no, I wasn't clear. I had done another movie for PBS called Foodways, and I had discovered this story of this father-son story. And I was like, there is a movie here. And so I'd been developing it and so putting it together. What the way PBS works, and it's different than most networks, and it's particularly challenging if you're a filmmaker, is that you have to have the idea, you have to have the fully developed idea. You have to then raise the money. You have to produce the entire thing. And then they'll give you a platform, but they don't really necessarily, they don't give you money, and they give you a lot of soft support like legal and graphics and PR, and again, this wonderful platform, but you have to kind of bring everything. So LA Foodways was also nominated for an Emmy, and I again had developed this relationship with KCT, PBS, and LA, and so I've been talking to them about this, and they did this remarkable thing where they said, we're going to give you money to do this. They never do that. They were able to find a light item and be able to essentially put money into the project. So when I say I had been developing it, it was very much my story. It was very much something I wanted to do. I collaborated with them, and they're extraordinary people there who are, an amazing development department, so that we were able to kind of, fine tune how to tell this and what it was. But this was an idea that I had and the relationship that I had. It's just that the unusual part is that they had actually sort of wrote a check, which again, they never do.
Cool. All right, so let's talk about inside the Arthouse. You and Greg Lemley taking your partnership from only in theaters and it's kind of the perfect idea for the podcast because he owns Arthouse theaters. You are a filmmaker and an appreciator of art house cinema. Both of you are, big fans of that. And so you get together, you talk to filmmakers about movies that are opening up, independent films, and you have these great hour-long conversations about them. How did that idea come together? I mean, it sounds like very obvious, but also it hadn't happened before you made the documentary, right? So tell me about the
Yeah.
genesis of this.
And it was never even sort of something that I imagined doing. I mean, I've been on a ton of podcasts, and I've, look, Greg Lemley has committed himself, and this is what I found so moving, was generations of the Lemley family have essentially dedicated themselves to film and filmmakers, and these, they are responsible for introducing foreign film to Los Angeles, which was arguably the transmission point that affected Hollywood in such a huge way, in the 50s and the 60s. They won the French Legion of Honor for what they did for the French New Wave. They have been doing this for almost 100 years. And the original progenitor, the original Lemley, of course, is one of the biggest movie moguls, which is Carl Laemmle, their first cousin. That's what I made the movie about. But this family instinct to kind of support film and support movies and theaters has been, it's literally in the DNA of this family. And that's what I found so moving about it. So I guess this is striking in that, I spent 2 years following Greg around with the camera. And then another year, as we released the film and we played 100 theaters around the country and all the stuff and all the promo and everything else we did, at the end of it, we still liked each other, which is, kind of a good thing. And so, it sort of became obvious that we were sort of at the end of our, like, okay, I think we're kind of like, we had our sort of our last screening and our last Q&A and our last kind of interview. And I said, Greg, what do you think about sort of doing something? And he was like, I like that idea. And so what we did is we ended up sort of working. So one of the producers on Lincoln Theaters is working on a very, very successful podcast called Flagrant, which is out of New York, and it is a comic, and they get gajillions of views. And he works on that, and he introduced me to sort of another fellow named Miles McCreary, who both work on the Flagrant, and they came on to kind of as supervising producers to help us develop an idea of how do we do something that feels more like a talk show. What we do is very ambitious, Ian, and we do a 4-camera setup. We shoot it in Los Angeles on location in this 100-year-old theater, which is the Royale, which used to be a vaudeville house and is now essentially, converted fourplex. But it is this gorgeous arch is there, is original to the theater, and Greg is beloved by filmmakers and distributors because he cares about film. And he's honest, and he's not a jerk. These are important things, and it's a family business. Whenever I go, if I'm looking for something new, to like I want to find a plumber or or even like a dry cleaner, family business since 1909. I'm like, I'm going there because you always just sort of know that there's a sort of an extra sort of level of care and pride in what they do, and our film really kind of takes him through this sort of Herculean journey of kind of deciding to continue to do what he loves to do. And by the way, the film is in the black at the moment, and they're doing well. This, we are at a sort of this point where people are slow to come back to they're coming to big films, but they're slower to come back to some of the smaller films. And I know as a filmmaker how hard it is if you don't have a Netflix or Nat Geo budget to get noticed, to get seen, to get people to come out and come. It's tough to break through the noise, man, and it's really hard. So me as a filmmaker, sensitive to what it's like to essentially open in theaters, and obviously Greg, who runs 7 theaters and again has this giant legacy and background. It's sort of a kind of a chocolate and peanut butter kind of idea, I think, where we get to actually talk to filmmakers in the theater, or remotely on screen, but again in the theater, about their movies as they're opening theatrically, and the idea is to really amplify their launch. It's really to kind of like let people know, because there's so much out there, right? And the big, Moanas and Wickeds get all the freaking airtime. So the smaller movies, which unless you're really out there digging, you don't know about, are where honestly where the most interesting things are happening, the most creative and dynamic and sort of the most ingenuity is happening essentially in the indie film world at this point. And Sujua, for example, is someone who I love his films, and he's a perfect example. Is someone who basically these are so many wonderful kind of spirited filmmakers who make something from nothing and make something beautiful and remarkable. And so that's what we are sort of focused on. So inside the Arthouse, we've now done about about 10, 12 shows, and we have a lot more planned. A lot of really incredible filmmakers are talking to us because they know Greg, and it's really it's a way to kind of find out what's opening right now and what's happening, and we're also talking to film historians or people, indie insiders, stuff like that. It's a way to so if people like your podcast, I imagine it's a way to kind of also it's a film lovers podcast for sure.
Well, I mean, I got to say, like the setup that you have, that you mentioned, the 4-camera setup, it's all very, polished. Not to say that it's, superficial or anything, but it looks very professional. It's something that is compelling to watch. And having the filmmakers you're talking to up on that big screen, are they actually on the big screen, or is it like a post effect? Because it looks like you're in a theater talking to people on the actual movie screen. But then I'm thinking the sound is just so perfect and natural. How do you do it?
Yeah, well, I work very hard to get people microphones. We do a lot of, and then we have a mix. Thomas does the mix on the back end. We have great mics that we work with, and we record into I know you work on StreamYard. We work on Riverside, which is essentially similar, but it has it has broadcast quality sound and audio. Unlike Zoom, which basically is difficult to edit because it's all comes on the same beam, as it were, as I'm told. And so, we, the idea is to try and do a really high quality talk show, really. And again, let these filmmakers talk as you have with me, Ian, not having to feel like you have to hit sound bites, and that you can actually, hit, things that are a little deeper, a little richer, a little more fulsome in terms of kind of information.
Well, I gotta say, like the chemistry between you and Greg is amazing. I was watching just this morning. I was catching up on your interview with Mark Cousins, talking about that Alfred Hitchcock documentary.
Yes, God, I love that interview. He's such a cool guy, man.
He is, and I'm embarrassed to say I was not familiar with his work before watching your show. But it was, you played the trailer towards the end of but the entire hour leading up to that, or whatever it was a trailer for that, because letting him talk about his career, you kind of fanboying out in the best way about talking to him and everything, and his body of work, and also what he tried to do with that movie, basically bring Alfred Hitchcock back to life to talk about his movies in a contemporary kind of context. Like, I have to see this. So congratulations on a very successful show. Your viewership is just like exploding. It's crazy. And I think I'm excited to see you bring in more talent and get people again excited about it. One of the other things I love, and it's a very small detail, is you might think of from a cynical standpoint, okay, Greg Laemmle owns theaters. These are all going to be movies playing at Laemmle Theater, so it's a promotional thing. But in the case of Cousins' film, you asked, I think, so when is it opening? Where can people see it? And Cousin said, I don't know. I have no idea about that stuff. But Greg was like, well, it's going to be opening at, I can't remember which theater it was, but it wasn't a Laemmle theater. And he said, hopefully it'll come to our theater someday, but it's opening here. And I never do this, but go buy tickets at that theater and see this movie. So it's it really is the spirit of getting exposure to these films rather than just some kind of like, this is a stop on a marketing tour.
That's exactly right. And the filmmakers and their body of work. And Greg has made a big point of saying, this is not about Laemmle movies. This is about Arthouse all over the country. It's important that we, educate people about what's out there. And we have 3 marketing people. We have a giant Laemmle mailing list. We're going to have clips in the movie theaters, that is before the pre-show, and then also in the lobbies themselves. We, promote both the clips as well as also the interviews. And we're trying to, again, remind people that really the cool kids are in indie cinema, man, independent. I mean, the Arthouse are the most interesting, smartest, just extraordinary people, because we just talked the other day about this amazing movie. I'm sure it'll come to Chicago, but with Sandy Dubowski. He's the director of a film called Sabbath Queen. He spent 21 years making this movie. 21 years, and it's extraordinary. It's an extraordinary film. There really are just wonderful, interesting, creative people out there. And if you think, God, there's nothing to watch, and come listen to some of these people talk, because it's thrilling to hear what they did, thrilling to hear how they made it. Another film called Porcelain War, about this incredible film teacher who basically collaborated, smuggled cameras into Ukraine, and made this beautiful documentary about artists in the midst of the Ukraine war, as they're making their porcelain arts and then picking up guns. I mean, it's incredible. Anyway, on and on and on. These are, to a person, just extraordinary artists who are doing the impossible, which is making something and actually seeing it all the way through to completion and then opening in theaters. They're the people that are really, I think, the superheroes out there.
Yes, for sure. And congratulations again to you and Greg. You're doing great work. Please keep it up, because I'm having a hell of a time catching up on all the episodes and expanding my list of movies I need to watch, as if I didn't have enough. All right, Raphael, we're kind of over our time here, but I do appreciate you hanging out and talking about your career and risky business and inside the Arthouse. And you're always welcome back here if you have anything new to promote or discuss. I just love talking the biz with you. It's a lot of fun.
Thanks, Ian. Same. You're a remarkable guy, and thank you for what you do. And just just you're so committed and so on the case. I just appreciate you enormously.
Well, thank you. All right, man. Take care.
Be well. Take care, Ian. Cheers.
You too.